Hi, I'm Patricia Grabarek.
And I'm Katina Sawyer, and welcome to the Worker Being Podcast.
Today, we are so excited to be joined by Maggie Moore. She's the HR lead at FMP Consulting. And Maggie and I have known each other for many, many years. My first job out of grad school was at FMP, and we were consulting together on a number of projects. And then Maggie's transitioned over into HR, and she's had a really interesting career trajectory. So, would love to hear more about that. But I'm so excited to have you, Maggie. It's been so fun to reconnect and talk over the years now that we aren't working together. But FMP was such a great experience for me, and I've kept in touch with so many people because it's such a great place to work. So, yeah, thanks for joining us.
Of course, and thank you for having me. I'm super excited to reconnect and talk about this topic area, which I've become more and more passionate about as the years have gone by and I've gone through my career transition. And I definitely feel like this is an area that we need to talk about as a culture in an organization among our leadership and employees to really move us forward into the next century. So I'm super excited to be here and talk more.
Awesome. Yeah. Along those lines, do you think you might be able to give us a little bit more of some details on your background, just so that our listeners know kind of a little bit more about your history and your family and kind of what led you to be passionate about the topic that you're going to be discussing with us today?
Absolutely. So interestingly enough, I started my career as many aspiring psychologists do, actually in social work. Coming straight out of school, I studied psychology and business, and not to go too much into that, but I really have always loved working with people and helping people, which led me to a career that started in human resources and really from a point of being really strategic about how we manage organizations to help them be really productive and employees for being really happy. I decided to delve into more of that strategy side and go get my master's in industrial organizational psychology, which you guys share as a background. And that really led me in many ways to where I am today. I was at FMP straight out of grad school, like Patricia. Worked as a long time as a consultant in many areas within industrial organizational psychology, and really, started at the time thinking about where I wanted to go in my career. Did I want to continue to be a consultant? Did I want to go internal? And as I was doing that, I learned a lot about myself and what I value, and a lot about wellness, really. And how do I don't think it's work-life balance. I think it's maintaining the effectiveness in both parts of your life and deciding what's really a priority for you. And ultimately, I had made a transition after a few years of being a consultant because I wanted to focus more on my wellness so that I could prepare myself to have a family. And I had no idea what I was getting myself into, but really knew that I needed to take that step back. So I left FMP for a brief period and continued to work with them, but as an independent consultant, while actually jumping into becoming certified as a health coach, which was a little bit more on the holistic end. We do talk about nutrition and fitness and some of those things, but really also talking about career and relationships and lifestyle, all of that from that holistic perspective, and how all of that contributes to your life and your productivity at work and whatnot. And so I did that and really learned that I actually love what I do, but I just needed to kind of do it in a little bit of a different capacity and role, and take a little bit of a step back and ratchet my hours down, and focus on making sure that I was really being as competent and productive as I wanted to be, while at the same time being able to prioritize all those other things in my life. So that led me to come back to FMP in 2017, more recently, as an internal role. It's kind of meta. I really do, internal human capital for a human capital consulting firm, which really kind of ups that standard. But in between all of that, I was pregnant with my first child, Avery, in 2014, and she's now, gosh, she's a little over 4, which is crazy.
Wow.
And I know, I can't believe it. I really can't believe it. She's like a little girl now. It's kind of crazy to me that I have a 4-year-old. And in many ways, it's flown by, and in many ways, it's been the longest years, the longest days, and maybe some of the short years of my life, as they say. It's true. On that journey, I felt like I was really in a good place after I had her and able to do this independent consulting and work on the kind of projects I wanted, mostly with FMP. And then I had my second child, CJ, May 2017. So he just turned 2, which is a full-blown toddler, which is also shocking to me. And after I took, I was on my own, so I took whatever leave I could and kind of bankrolled my own time by working more before. So I took about 5 or 6 months off with both of them, which is way above the US average, but decided to come back to FMP in that internal role when I came back to work with CJ. And I quite honestly never would have rejoined any other organization, but FMP has always been extremely accommodating and flexible. And when they approached me about coming back internally, I said, that sounds wonderful. I've really wanted that in my career, but I really don't want to work full time right now. It's not my priority. My career is not my priority right now. I love what I do, but that's not where I'm focused. And they said, well, hey, we've had Wendy supporting us on recruitment and onboarding for a while, and they'd had nobody in that role for a while since 2 people had left the organization. So they said, hey, why don't we create a job share? You guys talk about it and see what you think. And subsequently, I am in a job share where Wendy works 20 hours, I work 20 hours. So we're kind of like one person, where she focuses on recruitment and onboarding. I focus on training and development, benefits, employee relations, and engagement, as I prefer to call it. And then we share all the other not so fun stuff like the compliance and the reporting and all of that jazz. And it's been really wonderful. She's got kids that are older. I've got the little kids, and she's got a very different perspective. So I feel like we make a great team, and it's such a great experience. And being able to have that has allowed me to return to work and really go where I want to go with my career and get that experience. So I'll stop there because that's a lot of information, but basically to say I've had, kind of, maybe a common trajectory with my career, but ratchet it back a little bit while I have these little kids with the knowledge that I can make a deeper dive, when my kids get older. Hopefully, we'll see.
Yeah, I'm not surprised that FMP would be that amazing and flexible, because they were when I was there too. And I really enjoyed that about working there, is just having the support and the flexibility and people around you that really want to make things work. So, kind of as a FYI for all of our listeners, when I worked at FMP, towards, I guess, 2 years in, I was dying to get back to California. So FMP's in DC, and I really wanted to move back home near my family. And FMP supported me in that and let me do that and work as a contractor for another year until I found a full-time position here in California. And it was not like dramatic at all for me to do that, or
Mhm.
no one got upset. Everyone knew that I was probably going to be looking for another job, and yet they still support you because they're just such great people that really care about their people. And, if you're doing good work, like, okay, maybe you'll leave in a year, but at least in that year, they get to benefit from your work too. So it's kind of a nice balance between being a good employer and also getting the best out of the employees that they have. And obviously, with you, Maggie, they see so much potential, and you're a really hard worker, a really great employee. So why wouldn't they try to make something work where you can have your priorities and have your life in order, and they can also benefit from your intelligence and your hard work as well.
Well, thank you. That's so sweet of you. And I honestly, I've worked for FMP for more than 10 years at this point in some capacity. And they have been, like you said, incredibly flexible. I mean, I moved to Florida for what I thought was going to be a year, but became 3 years for, at the time, my boyfriend, who is now my husband's job. And I thought I would have to leave. And they said, well, hey, just stay. We'll work it out. And yeah, I had a lot of colleagues, maybe you, bring me around to clients on the laptop video and other creative ways. And then, I came back and I wasn't really, it's kind of at a ceiling in that point in my career there where I didn't want to really be doing more of the business development from consulting, and didn't realize that I loved the technical work as much. So we kind of tried to shift things around in my job for about a year. And then at that point, it was sort of made sense. I said, hey, I, really want to do this health coaching thing. And at the time, my mom was, incredibly sick and eventually entered hospice right around that point. And it just made sense for me to be an independent contractor. And they've always supported me and encouraged me. And so having the opportunity to come back, I honestly don't think I would do it anywhere else.
Yeah, I think that that's really interesting because, you know, there are so many different pieces of the puzzle to juggle when you're trying to figure out work and you're trying to figure out, these new family responsibilities that you have. And, you have
Hmm.
competing priorities, but you don't want to neglect entirely one or the other. And so, it's really useful. And, some good research out there on what happens when women are going through pregnancy in the workplace shows that, people think really hard during that time period about what's it going to be like? How am I going to balance these things? What am I going to prioritize? And so, taking some of that or alleviating some of the stress associated with the stigma of having children, or this idea that, like, well, if I go out there and tell them that I'm going to have a baby, I'm not going to be able to return, or they're not going to view me the same way, or they won't make arrangements to make things work for me. Um, is common. And so I think, taking that part of the stress off of the plate is certainly a good thing. I think though, when you were talking about these sort of accommodations that were able to be made, which obviously was a win for them because they get to retain and actually attract back
Yeah.
a talented employee. But it sounds like things worked out very well structurally from, a job, from the perspective of the tasks on the job and being able to come back to the job and flex things around. But I know one of the things that you want to talk about today is sort of what didn't work out as expected, or some things that were unexpected or not
Hmm.
plannable, sort of more of the emotional, psychological side of things stemming from pregnancy, having children. So, would you be able to talk a little bit about some of the things that you were not able to anticipate?
Absolutely. And it was funny because when we were talking about this before, I definitely, have a little bit of a history of that would predispose me to having some of those more postpartum challenges kind of in the mental health arena. And I knew that and anticipated that. And it's funny because I didn't really get that with my first child. It was really the second child that surprised me in terms of those, I think becoming a parent, gosh, such a steep learning curve. I think to myself all the time, how did my parents do it? How did they do it? And you can read about it and talk to people and prepare yourself as much as you can until you do it. I mean, I think people know that, but it's hard to really understand that experience until you've walked in those shoes. And so for me, I had kind of a great, my mom had passed away right before my daughter was born. And I had this kind of life out of after death experience that was almost euphoric with Avery. It's kind of amazing. And because I was in much more of control in my career, it seemed to be, great. So I kind of got blindsided, quite honestly, after I had my second child. And I really didn't see it coming. And I had what I can only understand now that I'm out of it as having, not postpartum depression or anxiety in the classic sense, but having this thing that people don't talk about and is frankly embarrassing, but, very realistic for a lot of people, of this thing called postpartum rage that really negatively impacted my life in terms of, while like right after he was born, while I was on leave, and then, wanting to come back to FMP, but, really struggling with, regulating myself, struggling with not sleeping, which just made it worse, and struggling with kind of, who I was as a productive employee, and could I be that same person, when you're getting 2 hours of sleep and you're in this space where you don't know what's going on, and the society chalks it up to, hey, baby blues, or hey, you're not sleeping. People use sleep as a torture a torture device, and that just makes kind of that mental health piece so much worse and difficult to sort out. And I didn't, frankly, have an idea of how bad it was. And I came back to work and I loved it, but there was a really steep learning curve for me in terms of doing a different job, and in terms of coming back and having a completely different experience with my child, and losing my, detail orientation that was so essential to making me a good employee and being productive. So I really, really, really struggled the second time around in a way that I just couldn't anticipate.
Could you talk to us a little bit about this idea of postpartum rage? Because I haven't heard that term before. And I'm wondering, based on, it sounds like you've done a lot of research on this topic since, to try to pinpoint, what it was that you were experiencing, or to try to better understand and make sense of it. But how does that differ from some of the other kind of symptoms that people go through, or are there different types of postpartum experiences?
Mm-hmm.
So, just curious to hear a little bit more about that.
Absolutely. I mean, I think most commonly it's termed PPD or PPA. So the most common experience is that, 1 out of 7, which is shocking, new moms experience is the depression, which some people just chalk up to like baby blues, that, you're transitioning and you're sad about losing the life you previously had and your freedom. And, hormones are a real thing. So they dip when you actually have the baby. And so, I think there's complex interactions there, but that experience is very much being overwhelmed, low energy, kind of unable to complete daily tasks, being just, oh my gosh, I have all these dishes, and, I'm spending 10 hours a day feeding my baby, and how am I going to get through this? I'm really not the person I used to be. And then on kind of the anxiety end, which I think can be coupled with depression, just like anybody who had regular anxiety and depression that goes together. Gosh, that is horrible. It's like, worry all the time. Worry about that your child's going to die in their crib from sudden infant death syndrome. You look away for a second, or you fall asleep and your child dies, or someone's going to steal your child. This very irrational thinking, or my child isn't getting enough milk from breastfeeding, and I'm going to have to give them formula, and I'm a terrible mom. And, it could go, I could go on and on, but it's really the predominant feeling is being anxious all the time, which is exhausting, and makes it very difficult for you to have a good experience and to have that transition, because you really feel like you just can't handle it. You're so anxious and all the time, and you can't enjoy, how, horrible do you feel when you have this beautiful child, and you're lucky, and that everyone can't have that, and you're so lucky. And yet you feel like it's a horrible experience and you want to get out of it. So I think that's really the more well-known symptoms. They don't even have a term for postpartum rage. Postpartum rage is more associated with bipolar disorder, which is more manic and hypomanic. So you guys may have heard of that. Again, lesser understood in the medical community, but some of the symptoms of that are going from anxious and depressed to manic. And part of the manic is the rage. And the rage is you're not patient, you're out of control. Everything triggers you. I mean, you are so angry. You're angry at your child for not sleeping. You're angry at your husband for not unloading the dishwasher. You have no patience. It's to look at it from a psychological sense, your window of tolerance is extremely small. So what you're able to manage is almost nothing. And kind of anybody does anything, or you drop a pan and break an egg, it's just such a big deal. And you get so upset. And some of it is very dark and scary. It's, you know, you're so mad that, this is why, honestly, people shake their child. This is why, people get divorced. It's really hard to live with a person like that. It's really hard to live with yourself. It's incredibly upsetting. And I like to think that I was a very patient person before. Not chill. Definitely not chill. I'm very type A. But it almost makes it worse because you're just so out and you're totally out of control. I mean, you can't stop yourself because it just comes out, and the yelling and screaming, and I mean, it's really, really horrible and not understood. And so, people think, well, you're not depressed, you're not anxious, you're just being a horrible person. And this is not me. I mean, it just really came out of nowhere, knocked me over, and I've never in my life experienced something like that.
So, given that it's not a common diagnosis, or really, like Atina mentioned, not something I've ever heard of either, how did you come to this term of postpartum rage, or how did you get the help that you needed and, kind of get to where you needed to go to get through this?
I mean, it was really hard. I think for the first 11 months, I didn't know the term at all. Even I remember going to my OBGYN, I think it was my 6 week check-in. They do a check-in and they do a screening for postpartum depression. And the questions are just really minimal. And, they're being an OB, they don't really understand that. And I remember saying to him, I don't feel right. I really don't. I don't know what's going on. And he really brushed it off. And it made me feel like, okay, there's just something wrong with me. And I started talking to some of my, new mom friends who I knew had some postpartum challenges. And they actually were the ones that directed me to a site called Postpartum Progress, that does a lot of research and, promotes education to, everybody, to individuals, to employers, to family members on what this actually means and how postpartum disorders are manifested. And that's the first time I read about it. And my reaction was, oh, okay, this sounds like me. And it's validating. And it talks about, what you do to get help. And, a lot of that is medication because your brain chemicals are not working properly. And I resisted. I resisted going to a psychiatrist because I did not want to go back on medication. It isn't necessarily that harmful for your child, but if you're nursing, it can be a risk. And I have a La Leche lactation support group in my neighborhood, luckily enough, that it helped me with Avery because she was in the NICU. So I had a real uphill battle with her. And kind of opened up that conversation. People were on the Facebook page talking about this challenge. And I said, hey, I'm having this thing. What do I do? I don't know what to do. And people responded so compassionately to say, hey, this is normal. Get help, do what you can do. Contact the Infant Risk Center, talk to them about medications. And, I do have a therapist. And it was after, for me, I mean, quite sadly, one night where I don't even want to go into detail, but where I just really went over the edge for me and was totally hysterical about what I'd done to, my family, and kind of drove off in the middle of the night in my bathrobe and realized, hey, I went over the edge and I need to do something, and told my therapist about it, called her so upset. And she said, you need to go right now. And she actually sent me to a acute psychiatric center at a hospital nearby. And, because I couldn't get in, my therapist or my psychiatrist had retired right before CJ was born. And it takes like 4 or 5 months to get into somebody new, which is ludicrous in this world. So I couldn't get in. I didn't have a, psychiatrist. And I was just, wow, I did not anticipate. So I finally was able to get in, but it's been a journey. It took me about a year to get back to a place where I didn't have the rage. So, to answer your question, what led me was this progression into a very severe, very, very severe episode that happened with my family where I realized, wow, I'm hurting them and I'm about to hurt myself. And I've got to do something.
Yeah. I mean, I think it's really important to share these stories, and we're so grateful that you're willing to do that because there's not as many people as there should be talking about these kinds of things, and so the less people talk about it, the less people want to talk about it because they feel like it's not normal. And it's great that you got the support that you needed from these groups of people, but you had to kind of still seek that out, or it's not common knowledge, or for a while you felt like something was wrong with you. And I know when Patricia and I went to Create and Cultivate conference a couple of years back. They had various keynote speakers, and I know Chrissy Teigen was
Yes,
talking about her experiences with postpartum. And I think the more you hear from people talking about it in public forums, the more normalized it becomes, and the more people are willing to recognize that they have an issue and go get help. But certainly still there may be some risks involved in speaking about it. Could you tell us a little bit more about what made you want to speak up about this issue, and if there are some challenges that you faced since you started being more public about the struggles that you had?
absolutely. In fact, I had a really positive response to sharing this. I initially, it was quite honestly, I had felt like I wanted to share it as I was coming out of it. I had a great friend who kept encouraging me. She kept saying, Maggie, you don't have to live like this. You need to get out of it. I know you're resistant, but you've got to do something. And she kept saying that, and she got out of it. And I thought, okay, it's possible. And then with the suicides of Anthony Bourdain and Kate Spade that one week, I was just, even though it wasn't postpartum related, it was this thing where you can be in this space, and how quickly can someone have a mood swing that they then decide in that moment they're going to kill themselves. I mean, that is so scary. And it happens, the with women, new moms, it is the second leading cause of mortality, which is really scary. And I had been struggling to find the words to talk about it for about 3 months. I wanted to post something publicly, but I just couldn't do it because I felt like, I don't know if I want to put myself out there. I really don't. And when I realized that, you know, after I resisted getting help and then I finally did, and then I didn't have to live like this, I wanted to tell other people. And I wanted to tell other people you can prevent suicide. I mean, on the extreme end, you can prevent living in this constant state of terror, but also suicide. I mean, that's a really serious consequence. And I just felt so compelled to share. And it's amazing. There was no backlash. There was no stigma. I mean, I got messages from people I hadn't talked to in years on Facebook saying, thank you. I had this experience, even though it may have been different than mine, and this is optimistic. I feel like there's not a stigma. I feel like I can get help. I mean, I had colleague or people that I knew that were extremely successful lawyers on the outside, men. I mean, men, rarely, never share this, or you don't think that men have this experience, and they're speaking up and saying thank you for opening that door and squashing that stigma. And I feel that, and I've gone through it. And I want everybody to know that you can get out of it, but you have got to do it. I mean, even, I have so many financial and other resources to go see a psychiatrist and pay them, to go see a therapist, and think about how many people don't have that, in the not, in a different socioeconomic place. I mean, this is, you have to put yourself out there and make it known so that everybody is educated, and everybody, knows someone in a family or a friend or in a different position can share that information and work hard to support those people. Because quite honestly, when you're in that state, you're the last person that's going to support yourself. So I just felt so compelled by the suicide, which is, I don't know how that, it happened almost instantaneously, where I thought, wow, this is really bad. I need to talk about it.
And I think we all appreciate you talking about it. I mean, I was one of those people that read an interview that you did with another blog about your experience, and I hadn't known, that you had gone through any of this until I saw that. And it really, I mean, I thought it was so important, so impactful, and obviously led to this conversation today because I thought, our listeners that maybe have experienced this or know people that have experienced this could really learn from your experience or feel supported by the fact that, there's someone out there talking about this and talking about the rage side, which is, as you said, not as common and not as talked about or not as well known. And I think it's huge. And, obviously, given where we are with worker being and the employment side, like you were in the midst of all this when you were starting back at work because you had just finished your
Yeah,
leave, right? So, how
crazy.
did that go? And I mean, I know FMP is so supportive, but how were you getting through all of that? And how did that, your experience looks for everybody listening?
Yeah, it was a serious struggle, an internal one, I think, because FMP is such a high performing workforce. I was in a constant state of stress and overwhelm for about the first 6 months, which I think is normal for an onboarding period anyway. I mean, imagine if we treated transition of new parents like we do onboarding of new employees. I mean, they were really supportive in terms of letting me slowly increase my hours. I didn't really know I was in that state. I kind of thought that it was stressful for me at work and that I didn't know what I was doing in terms of benefits, but it made it worse for me on the mental health end. And so that, I think if I was somewhere else, I would have lost it and left my job. But, I had some incredibly supportive people there. And I think that's why I was able to kind of make it out of that period, um, and get help. FMP was instrumental in me getting help. Once I recognized it, I didn't tell them everything, but I generally said I really need to, go to a therapist. Every week I need to work from home. I need to go to a psychiatrist. And they said, do whatever you're going to do. And so my experience was really kind of trying to distinguish my reintegration to the workforce and overwhelm from an actual like chemical medical disease, and then really saying I have to treat this like my life depends on this. I have to treat this, my career depends on this. I can't be successful in my career if I am this way. And so, it was a positive experience on the other end of getting help, and a very um, scary experience of feeling like I really would never be able to do this job. So I guess, I don't know, it's kind of a weird thing to say. It's sort of positive and negative, but ultimately was able to get to a good place. And I feel like once I got to a year in the job, the first 6 months were not great. And I got feedback about that and I knew it. But then after that next 6 months, and when I got help, you could really see the difference. And that made me feel, validated, and like I really needed to continue to push myself, to pay attention to this, medical
Mhm.
issue.
So when you're talking about your experiences with FMP, it sounds like, most of the things that they could have done to support you, they did right. What do you think other employers could do to learn from this case, right? So how could employers handle, maternity leave or parental leave or postpartum better? What should people take away if there are leaders and organizations listening to this that they could do better? And then have you implemented any changes at FMP as someone who's working in HR that helps to create that even further, even though it sounds like there was nothing broken in that system? Is there anything that you have done or steps that you've taken to improve it even further?
Absolutely. So I'll back up and give you a quick preface, to understand what I can tell employers in terms of what they can do, just so I think they understand sort of the why. I mean, I think you guys have always demonstrated, the research demonstrates that for employers, it really is about the bottom line. Like, they've got to do this, for their business, because we live in a knowledge economy, and your employees are the success of your business, the productivity, the morale, all of that. So you really there's a significant business case in investing in helping parents transition back to work. You know, I think the important point, one thing I wanted to stress was the US society and our country does a huge disservice to new parents. I mean, I don't know if everybody knows this, But the US is the only developed country without a national paid parental leave policy, which in my mind, I mean, that really leaves employers to pick up the slack, which isn't realistic for many and seems kind of overwhelming. It's like, well, what do you do? I mean, not everyone's Facebook. We can't all provide 4 months of paid leave. I mean, that's crazy. It's such an expense, especially for a small business, even for a business that knows that they want to do that. Can they? How could they justify that? And I think the other thing, I think you've seen in modern society too, is this progression of more women in the workforce. And, we're not living in the Mad Men era. We've all seen that show. This is, dual earner households. This is people that, for the most part, don't even, government says you have to give 3 months of unpaid leave. I mean, a lot of the workforce isn't even eligible for that. I mean, when I worked at another company, they said, well, you live in Charleston, South Carolina, and you don't qualify for the Federal Medical Leave Act of 3 months. So you only have your 2 weeks of PTO and you have to come back to work or get fired.
Oh my God.
Real life situation. And so just to not belabor that.
Wow.
Yeah, it's crazy.
That is intense, and certainly supports the idea that, companies need to think harder about the ways in which they're culturally supporting their employees, and also for all of us to think about advocacy and pushing for, national federal policies that would help to take some of that burden off of employers. So as these sorts of issues get tossed around politically, and thinking about, where you want to, cast your votes, or what way you want to think about, spending your time supporting different policies, practices, advocacy work. That certainly is another avenue to make some progress outside of just individual organizations trying to do the right thing.
Yeah. And it's, I know there's hashtag lead on leave and all of those, similar to, gun safety is, I would say the level of awareness has become higher over the years. But I mean, I think it's really hard to pick up the slack. And I think the other, you have all these studies that show that, providing that paid leave, even from, a really serious standpoint, can lower infant mortality, and that, people are coming back way before they're ready. I mean, it takes an average of 6 to 8 weeks just to recover physically from having birth. And there's studies that show that it takes a year to even get to a state where your hormones and other things are normal, where you're not sleeping 2 to 3 hours a night. I mean, can you imagine? I can't now, but doing your job well on that kind of sleep, I mean, that's just nuts, and it forces you to choose between caring for this helpless infant and forcing yourself to go back to work. I mean, that is a huge, and not having, just to, make it real. I mean, my husband went back to work after like a week or two, and I had to take an Uber to my, 2-week follow-up or even 6-week follow-up appointment because I couldn't drive. I mean, that's just nuts, and I was on my
Yeah.
own. Really, I mean, I had supportive family, but the other thing I was really thinking about after, I knew I was going to do this podcast was that it does take a village, and it does really take a village. That's an expression, but it is a reality that I've experienced, where, back in the day, families used to live together. You had grandparents around to, help. And, in other countries like Ghana, like women are made to rest. They literally, for at least 6 months, are solely responsible for feeding that child. They're given meals by other people. People hold their kids so they can get some sleep. I mean, it's just this big village. And today we don't have that. We live far away from our families, right? And then you see a lot of people moving home after they have kids to be with, near their families. I mean, I lost my whole family, so I don't have a family. I have wonderful in-laws, but they live far away. And so, what do you do? And for most, the workplace is such a big village. I mean, for everybody, identity wise, you spend all this time there more than at home. And so they're the village. And so employers really need to know that they've got to pick up that slack. And that is no easy feat. So I would, say that, there's so many reasons why, what I'm going to tell you about, things that you need to, that you should consider doing, easy ways to do it, more of an investment. I think it's all really important. But I think if employers understand that they are that village and that they need to do more, because the US is terrible. I'm not, I'll just say that. I don't think we need 1,000 statistics to tell us that. I mean, we have the leave issue. We've got these really high expectations, social media, Instagram, people looking like they're doing it all. It's unrealistic. I read this article about the relentlessness of modern parenting, and the quote that I felt rang true was, you are feeling that the expectation is, on parents, especially women, that you should return to work as if you do not have children and raise your children as if you don't have a job. And I'm sorry.
Yeah.
No, 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 no. And so, you have employers having to pick up the leave. You have to pick up got to figure out how to support people through navigating this unrealistic expectations, which does relate to your career. And a lot of your time you spend at work. And God, daycare. Don't even get me started about that. But there's scarce, affordable daycare, which is a huge stressor of people coming back to work and being able to come back to work within 3 months of having a child, for example. I mean, I know this sounds crazy, but it's a very real thing, especially where we live, to have to get on a waiting list for daycare like 3 to 5 years in advance, especially for some people that work for federal agencies that provide affordable daycare. It's such a big demand, and there's long waiting lists, and it's more than a mortgage. I mean, you're spending, at the low end, $2,800 for 2 kids a month. At the high end, $4,200. I mean, that's more than a mortgage, and a tough thing to put on parents. I mean, they're choosing to have kids, but how is that even realistic to even make someone choose to go back to work, even if it's not financially viable, or to work when it's not viable for their family dynamics? I think that's another thing that the US has, that in terms of, what employers can do, is something that they need to consider. And I'll move on to strategies now, because I don't want to, beat a dead horse. But, in thinking about what employers can do, I look at, paid leave, or longer leave. I look at how can you help people reintegrate to work, just like onboarding, or one would have for like a relocation or reintegration program to the US if you were overseas for years. In that way, how can you help them with balancing daycare? You don't have as many stay-at-home moms. You got to pick up kids at 2:45. You have to drop them off at preschool. I mean, how do you work 9 to 5 and do that? I mean, you simply cannot. It's not realistic. For many, it's not affordable. So, what can employers do there? And I know you wanted me to talk about kind of FMP. Do you want me to move into
Yeah.
that?
Yeah, I mean, I think that everything that you shared is really important, because employers clearly can do things within their own walls. They also have some sway politically as well, for very, very large companies, that they could, as a company, advocate for or try to speak out about the need for better national policies. So I think that there's advocacy piece. There's also a piece of, creating that village, like you mentioned. In your specific role, what have you done to make this easier for employees at FMP, or even easier for employees at FMP? And then for people who are listening, who are employees within all kinds of organizations, based on the research that you've done and kind of the work that you've been completing in this area, how can people apply as individuals in organizations? Maybe they're not decision makers. What you've learned so far in your journey, and what advice would you give people who are listening?
Absolutely. So, as you mentioned before, I did come into an incredibly supportive family-friendly work environment. That's, small women-owned business, where everybody, who's in a leader has family, and in some cases small kids. And so we have kind of this built-in culture and values of autonomy and flexibility, which is huge area where employers can support new parents. But that's really built in, and I think a lot of organizations try to espouse, their values. They've got to walk that talk. I mean, it is a little bit of a top-down thing. And so my experience is, in Message for Leaders, is that you have to pay attention to this and really look at, what is your culture? Are you saying that you're flexible and you're not? What's really happening? So at FMP, I think, they've already focused on that. So I came into that. I think a piece on benefits, especially regarding paid leave and things like supporting parents in managing their care for their children, especially when something comes up last minute. You got to go to the meeting and your child is in the ER, or in my case, my child stopped breathing the minute I was supposed to present at a staff meeting and ended up in the ER. Oh my gosh, talk about stress. But we do regularly survey our workforce on benefits and other things. We look at engagement, but specifically in the area of benefits. And we're always reevaluating how we can kind of move around the finances to offer more. So I think that's something I would say I don't know if a lot of organizations really do those type of surveys and really delve into that level of detail in terms of seeing, what employees want. I don't know if every organization they want that. We have a pretty young workforce, but I think that's something you need to evaluate and look at. Can you do more? And if you can't do more with your current situation, well, could you move things around? Ask people. I think overwhelmingly you're going to find that people want more leave, parental leave. And so, we're always evaluating that. The other thing is, I co-chair a work-life effectiveness committee, which is kind of our wellness wheelhouse that we've had for years. And when you look at wellness, I think, the general wellness wheel, as, our health insurance company, Cigna, thinks about it as nutrition, fitness, financial wellness, some social wellness, but there's not a lot in the area of parental or family wellness. And so we've looked at that. And in my role, I've partnered with my co-chair to think about what can we do. We've had informal new parents groups come together. I think that's kind of a grassroots effort that, you could encourage from, managers having check-ins with their employees, or pairing people with mentors, or saying, hey, it might be a good idea to talk to this person who just came back from leave, and to encourage and open that up. But we were also looking at, which is really simple, to, what are some resources that we could put together? Or could we provide, like we would provide career coaching, some, integration coaching for new parents? We could easily say, here, compile our resources. There's tons of webinars that are free about how to prepare to return to work, how to pump, which is a huge thing for moms. How do you pump milk when you do it? We provide a wellness room for that, but how do they get in there, and what do they need? And can we provide, a hospital grade pump, or, simply storage, or a space for them to work while they're pumping? You could quite honestly spend 3 hours a day expressing breast milk, and it's a huge interruption to productivity. And believe me, moms don't want to be sitting there eating bonbons and looking at Instagram. They want to be productive. I had a friend I was talking to earlier, and she kind of spearheaded this. They have floor to ceiling windows like we do in the office. Spearheaded this effort to get this dedicated room for breast milk, and have workstations, where they have the workstations and they have the phone. They could be on conference calls, and moms can get together and complain and give advice, right? Commiserate. And so, what can you do there? What can you provide? Gosh, this is legal to provide this space. And I hear about women pumping in bathrooms and pumping in closets. And that is not only illegal, but how is that productive for anybody, for the organization, for the mom? So I think, that's some of the stuff we are really working on at FMP, is bringing together those resources and potentially providing some more coaching support, bridging that gap of not having that village, connecting new parents. That's huge. I did a group called PACE that got together 12 new parents, and it was facilitated by a social worker that kind of went through all of the different challenges and provided strategies.
Yeah, I was going to say a lot of the examples that you're giving here are reasonably affordable. So maybe you can't afford to have, 8 months of paid paternal leave, or in the parental leave in the organization, but you can probably change a conference room into a wellness room and have a place for mothers. So there's a lot of like little things
Mhm.
that you mentioned here that I think are really great, that organizations could easily implement if they wanted to. All you have to do is have the desire to make that impact, and I think that you can easily make some of these little small changes that will make the workforce feel more supported and hopefully create a culture where people are supporting each other when they're going through these transitions. So I really like all those examples.
And absolutely, I think, one thing I've really been thinking about is don't forget about the fathers, because I think they're forgotten, like we talked about. And I think also don't forget about the
Hmm.
impact that managers make. We've done this started before my time, so I cannot claim that I've made this change, but we have done some training for managers on compassionate boundaries and how do you recognize when someone's struggling. You don't cross that line into getting into their life, but there's benefits such as employee assistance programs that are not heavily promoted that provide parental transition resources and counseling, and even related to dealing with teenagers and pumping and dealing with marital problems that can arise from having a child. I mean, all of that, I really try to promote that. I've done a lot more of that. We have short-term disability, which people don't realize. I mean, that's only for moms because, like I said, you're disabled for 6 to 8 weeks. So we try to work our program around the PTO. So we're not, we're giving people the maximum we can of paid time off plus short-term disability, and then trying to figure out how can we give that to fathers so it's not inequitable. I mean, we give the same amount of leave to fathers, obviously, and more than the federal, but what else can we do for fathers? And I've really been thinking about that. I haven't come up with the plan that I would want, but I think that's really important to think about that.
Yeah. So we so appreciate the tips that you've shared because you have so much experience, both personally, professionally, and in the research that you've done. Is there anything else that you would like to share with our listeners before we have a just a little fun question for you?
Yes, I wanted to go into some things, not new things that I've done, but really simple things that organizations can do, like we talked about, since we're not all Facebook or Google. And so the number one thing that I want to tell organizations is flexibility and autonomy is huge. So, for example, providing flexible work hours, not a rigid 9 to 5, providing some options to help people slowly transition back. So, we have people maybe come back at halftime, then increase to 32 hours, or maybe they want to dial it back and maintain a part time schedule. I mean, this is very realistic. I'm in a job share. I don't know how many, I don't hear of anyone else doing that. That's another piece of flexibility. People talk about this dial, what do you want to dial up? What do you want to dial back? And giving people an opportunity to dial back so they can be more productive and spend time with their kids. I mean, we have such flexible hours. I'm able to drop my kids off at daycare. I'm able to go to their karate lesson or watch them do something in school, parent teacher conference. I mean, it's about allowing people to be adults and saying, hey, do your work, but, do it how you want because, be productive, but take care of your kids when you want to take care of your kids. So that's a big thing. As I mentioned, training managers. I think one of the big things is managers are uncomfortable with broaching the subject. I think, you can train managers to how to have check-ins with employees, to pay more attention when they're transitioning back to work. They may not know what to say, but they can direct them to further support, direct them to HR, direct them to the employee assistance program. Nobody talks about these free resources that are available. So I think, doing some training, even if it's not super formal, but just educating them on how to do that. So that's a piece. I've already talked about kind of the benefit side of the house. I think one thing, beyond promoting employee assistance programs or looking at what your short-term disability provides and what you can do more of is my husband has what they call backup care, which is awesome, which is like up to 5 times a year for each child, you can get backup care. So when you have an emergency where your child's sick or, your nanny cancels or your daycare is closed, that you can have a vetted or registered, vetted nanny, vetted registered nurse come to your house for $10, or you can pay your provider, you can pay a babysitter back, so you're not in a financial hole. So I think it's not very expensive, and it comes with employee assistance programs. I definitely think it's something to look into. Um, I already talked about pumping and breast milk, so we won't talk about that. But as I mentioned, I think that's a really easy way to support moms coming back to the workforce and support breastfeeding that can be very beneficial from the medical sense to babies. So, and then, as I mentioned, wellness programs are looking at, financial and nutrition and other resources. So I think encouraging more of that parental support where your program does address that either through education or, group coaching. It doesn't have to be super formal, but even just having that resource available and connecting people with other new parents, letting them know that, hey, it's a huge help to have that group there, informal, mentor, peer mentoring, professional support, that kind of thing. And so I think that it's a huge thing. Some organizations have more formal, some organizations encourage these kind of employee resource groups, or, may even provide some resources for them, like a lunch or, conference room for them to meet quarterly, things like that, so they can organically develop those relationships. There's I don't necessarily need to talk about the big guys, but I think some of the, cool things I've seen is providing some more paid time off that's just for medical recovery, really extending that to adoptive, foster, LGBT community, that kind of thing, to be inclusive. Sometimes people provide, subsidies for childcare or kind of baby cash to help people bankroll this incredibly expensive leave. I mean, and gosh, General Mills, they let people have flexible, remote work arrangements. I mean, look, I have syrup in my hair right now and 8 loads of unfolded laundry, and my kitchen looks like a bomb went off. And, I'm able to sort that out because I work a really flexible schedule and I work a short schedule on Wednesday. So I have my afternoon to do that stuff, and I don't have to make a lunch or get in work clothes, when I pull up to preschool and my child vomits on me. I mean, that's like, it sounds stupid, but it goes a really long way. So I think that's what I say, just to plug that one more time, is the flexibility is kind of the number one thing. So if you're doing nothing, really start there, and then think about some of these other things you can do, which are, again, very low cost. And then if you're a bigger organization, step it up. Seriously, I'm going to say that. Like, you have a major obligation, you have the money, you need to do it.
Agreed. I second that. Any big company that's not doing it definitely needs to step up. And smaller companies that want to do it, I think there's a lot they can learn from everything you've just said, and trying to do it in an affordable way as much as they can to try to help their employees. And that flexibility is a great place to start. And I think we've already plugged FMP quite a bit and how amazing it is. So we won't spend a ton of time there, but we do want to do that final fun question. So this is just about your parenting in terms of how you want to spend your time with your children. And of course, I think most people would say they want to spend as much time with their children as they can. It's the nice answer. But if you had to pick only one way to do it, what would you choose? So meals, bedtime, playing, what would the one thing be that you would want to do the most?
Oh my gosh, if I could get out of bedtime, I would. Dinner and bedtime are the worst times of the day, especially with, little kids. So, and they kind of they let it loose on you in their worst behavior, which is totally normal developmentally. But for me, getting them out of the house and getting them on new adventures is what I want to be doing. And especially things like the beach, exploring water and the sand. I mean, it's something I enjoy personally, but gosh, I love when we can go to the beach. We do it at least once a year, but I'm already planning the summer to take, some day trips as much as we can, or maybe just one night away, or even, hiking, just new experiences outdoors is, even the pool. They have spray grounds and water play. So that's my favorite thing to do. Definitely kind of a dual parent requirement for supervising them, but I will sacrifice and do it myself just so I can have that experience with them.
Oh, that's a good answer.
That's awesome. Bedtime, yeah, I do not have children, but I have nannied for extended periods of time, and bedtime was never the time that was most fun.
You're
Um,
exhausted. It's like a 2-hour, 3-hour process. I mean, I love them so much and I love the cuddling, but the last thing that you want to do when you have to clean the house or make food is just spend those 3 hours doing bedtime and then be exhausted and have no time for yourself.
yeah, that makes
Mhm.
sense.
Yeah,
Um, well, thank you so much for sharing all of this information, and we really respect and honor the willingness that you have to speak about these difficult issues. I'm sure that our listeners will feel the same way. So thank you so much for sharing all this. I learned a lot. I'm sure everyone else will too, and we just really appreciate your time.
absolutely. Well, thank you for creating this forum to share. And I hope these tips are useful. And I know the background's kind of long, but I think understanding the why employers need to do it and why it's so important, hopefully will help to create that business case for leadership to be able to make those investments.
We agree. Thank you so
Absolutely.
much again, Maggie. I'm so happy that you're able to join us. It's always great talking to you. And yeah, thanks again.
Absolutely. Thanks, Patricia and Katina. I look forward to continuing to connect and listen to your podcasts.
Thanks.
Bye.
Thank you so much for Maggie for joining us today and talking about her experience with postpartum rage and motherhood in the workplace. I think we've learned a lot, a lot, honestly. So we'd love to hear from you now. We'd love to hear your stories. If you want to share your experience or any other advice you have for people, please reach out. You can find us at workerbeing.com. You can email us at workerbeing@gmail.com, or you can find us on social media at workerbeing on LinkedIn, Instagram, Twitter, and Facebook. Thanks so much for listening. The Worker Being podcast is hosted by us, Patricia Grabarek
And Katina Sawyer, and produced by Allie Johnson.